You're not misunderstood. You're unheard. Because what you carry wasn't made for the moment you're in. You were given a gift no one asked for and a loneliness no one sees. The worst kind of isolation isn't being alone. It's seeing too much too soon and having no one to hand the vision to. You walk into rooms and feel things no one's saying. You watch people speak and you already know what's not being said. You trace the shape of outcomes before the first step has even begun. And for a while that feels like power, until it feels like exile. You offer what you see, but the words fall flat. You soften the truth, hoping it lands. You frame it gently, you shrink it to fit. Still, blank stares, polite nods, a change of subject. And then, the worst kind of moment. You say something that came from the deepest place inside you and someone laughs. So you laugh too, just to make it sting less. Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself." That's not just a quote, it's a mirror. Because you've been carrying truth like fire and the world keeps handing you water, you stop offering. Not because you stopped believing in the vision, but because you stopped believing it could be received. And that's the fracture no one talks about. The moment when you stop trying to be understood and start preparing to live alone inside your clarity. You begin to watch instead of speak. You stay 3 steps ahead, quietly. You show people the version of you they're most comfortable with. And when they praise you for being wise, calm, centered, you smile. But inside you're screaming into a hallway with no doors. You didn't choose to be distant, you adapted. Because when no one can meet you where you are, you stop walking toward them. The more clearly you see, the harder it becomes to feel like you're anywhere that understands vision at all. You're not arrogant, you're just tired. Tired of translating your soul into words no one speaks. And in that fatigue, something inside you starts to dim. Not because the gift is gone, but because it was never meant to live in silence. And now silence is all you hear. You became the lighthouse. You didn't ask to be that. But the moment your vision sharpened, the world gave you a job. Stay steady, stay shining, stay alone, like I said. You became the fixed point others navigate by. You offered insight when people were lost. You offered structure when things fell apart. And it worked. Everyone found their way, except you. They called you grounded, wise, unshakable. But no one asked what it feels like to shine while sinking. They saw your beam. They never saw the storm inside the tower. You guided everyone else home and forgot you were allowed to need one too. And slowly you became the role. You stopped showing the parts of you that trembled. You stopped expressing the truths that were too heavy for the room. You trimmed your soul down to its most useful functions until all that remained was performance. And it paid off. You became respected, trusted, efficient. But here's what no one noticed. You were becoming invisible, not to them, to yourself. You used to carry your insight like a torch. Now it feels like a burden. You used to speak from the soul. Now even you've forgotten what your soul sounds like. You didn't lose your voice. You buried it under what was acceptable. You called it maturity. You called it strength. But if you were really free, why does the silence feel like a cage? You've guided so many ships to shore, but no one ever turned around to ask, who's guiding you? You became everyone's calm, but inside you're cracking under the weight of your own restraint. And the silence? It doesn't feel noble anymore. It feels like grief. Because you don't just miss connection. You miss yourself, the version of you that still believed being seen was possible. You are not a tool. You are not a function. You are not here to shine without being warmed. You are a soul. And you were never meant to go this long without being held by the very light you give. You told yourself it was strength. You called it independence, resilience, clarity, and maybe it was at first. You learned how to be calm in chaos, how to speak with precision, how to show up composed even when something inside you was unraveling. You became the person others came to for direction, but not the one they came to understand. And somewhere along the way, without knowing it, you traded authenticity for functionality. You became so good at appearing whole, you stopped remembering what wholeness actually felt like. Because this is what no one tells you about high-functioning isolation. It doesn't look like suffering, it looks like competence. It looks like someone who doesn't need help. Someone who can carry it all. Someone who never breaks down because they've already broken inward. You've felt it, haven't you? That quiet ache beneath the surface of your routines, that sense that something essential has gone missing, but you can't name what, and you're not sure when it left. You still perform, you still contribute. You still say the right things in the right tone at the right time. But afterward, when the lights are off and the room is quiet, you feel it, the hollowness, the sense that you've become a version of yourself that works but no longer lives. You didn't mean to disappear, you were just trying to stay safe. But safety without connection becomes a coffin. And you've been slowly burying parts of yourself under logic, control, and excellence. You don't even cry anymore, you just process. You grieve like a strategist, cleanly, privately, efficiently, as if feeling fully would interfere with who you've trained yourself to be, and no one sees it. Because your mask doesn't just hide the truth, it looks like the truth. It's not performative, it's practiced. You've worn it for so long, even you've forgotten it was ever optional. But the fracture is there, in your chest, in your breath. In that moment, when someone asks how you're doing, and you almost tell the truth, but don't. Because you're not sure what would happen if you actually let the dam break. And maybe for the first time you're beginning to wonder, what if the mask isn't protecting you anymore? What if it's just keeping you from being found? You thought the vision was your superpower, and it was, until it wasn't. You saw patterns no one else could see. You predicted outcomes before they arrived. You sensed danger, truth, contradiction instantly. You used your insight to build safety, to navigate complexity, and to stay 3 moves ahead of anything that could hurt. But now, the vision is looking inwards at, and what it sees is harder than any prediction. Because no amount of foresight prepares you for this, realizing that while you were busy mapping the world, you forgot how to live inside your own heart. You don't just analyze problems, you analyze feelings. You trace them, dissect them, make them manageable. You don't cry, you identify emotional patterns. You don't rage, you track stress responses. And somewhere in all that mastery, you disappeared. Because the cost of living in your mind is this: you start mistaking understanding for healing. But knowing why you're lonely doesn't make you feel less alone. Naming your trauma doesn't touch the ache it left behind. I thought you could outthink your wounds, but wounds don't speak in theory. They speak in tremors, in tension, in the way your chest tightens when someone sees too much of it. And now you're exhausted from clarity. Because clarity without connection becomes cruelty. It keeps you sharp but untouched. It makes you right but unreachable. You don't need more insight, you need presence. You need the kind of softness that doesn't ask for answers, just permission to be real. This is the turning point. The moment when the strategies start to fail, not because they were wrong, but because they were never meant to hold your soul. You've lived in the fortress of intellect long enough, and the vision is no longer out there. It's in here, pointing to the doorway you've been avoiding. Not the exit, the entrance, to the parts of you that were never broken, just buried. There comes a point when silence stops feeling safe. Not because someone breaks it, but because something inside you does. You used to call it solitude, a choice, a strength, and for a while it was. Until one day the stillness stopped restoring you and started exposing you. You wake up and feel the weight of something that has no name, a tension that doesn't scream, but won't let go. You move through your day like a blueprint, functional, composed, unreadable. And beneath it, something in you whispers, this was never supposed to be your whole life. You didn't choose detachment out of arrogance, you chose it out of necessity. Because connection required a level of exposure you weren't sure your inner world could survive. So you made a trade, depth for safety, emotion for structure, resonance for control. But now the cost is catching up. You no longer feel seen because you've stopped showing anything that can be seen. You've curated your presence so precisely that nothing raw ever leaks through. You don't cry anymore. You optimize. You process emotion like it's data, clean, clinical, manageable. You talk about grief like a timeline. You speak about trauma like a case study. But you've stopped feeling your own heartbeat in real time. You didn't disappear overnight. You became efficient, too efficient. You turned your inner world into something you could manage, and in doing so turned your soul into a spreadsheet. But the truth is, you miss yourself. The messy, uncertain, emotionally vivid self that used to feel things without apologizing for them. You miss being undone, not destroyed, but softened. You miss moments that made you break rhythm because they made you real. And the reckoning is this: you are not tired because you are weak. You are tired because you are divided. Half of you is still carrying the vision. The other half is begging to be carried. You've spent years learning how to think clearly. But what if your next act is learning how to feel honestly? Well, what if your soul doesn't want clarity anymore? What if it just wants to come home? This is the return you've been resisting. Not back to who you were, but to who you abandoned to become functional. And now that version of you is at the door, not demanding, not broken, just waiting. Because the silence you built as protection has turned into a wall that not even you can breathe behind. And it's not the world that has to tear it down, it's you. Not with force, but with permission. Not every light is meant to guide. Some are meant to heal, not by showing you the way forward, but by showing you that you were never lost. You've lived your life as the strategist, the one who holds the map, who reads the patterns, who sees it all before it happens. And yes, it saved you, but what it didn't do was save the part of you that longed to be held. Not for your vision, not for your strength, but for your soul. You built a life where everything made sense and wondered why it never felt like home. You turned your insight outward when it was always meant to turn inward first. You thought you had to carry the light. But now you know, you are the light, not the distant kind, not the cold, unreachable star, but the kind that burns within. The kind that warms as much as it reveals. You are no longer Atlas, no longer the lighthouse on the edge. You are the hearth, the quiet fire, the living warmth of someone who has returned from exile, returned from detachment, returned from the illusion that insight was ever more important than integration. You no longer need to be right. You need to be real. You no longer need to be admired. You need to be felt. And you don't need to explain anymore, because the truth is, if someone sees you clearly, you won't have to. You are not here to convince. You are here to connect. If this feels like your story, it is. You didn't come here for answers. You came to feel less alone in what you couldn't name. And if something in you just softened, if something in you finally felt seen, then don't let this stay unspoken. If this reached something you have hidden, subscribe. If this touched what you thought no one could name, share it. Because the strategist's burden was never meant to be carried in silence. You were never broken. You were awakening. And now you don't have to walk the rest of this path alone.